You're listening to The Conversation. It's midnight on June the 22nd, and as the drumming starts, protesters at New Delhi's Janta Manta Observatory are clapping and singing. They're entering the third day of a sit-in, calling for the resignation of India's education minister over an exam scandal. Many are filming on their phones. An Indian flag waves overhead. These are followers of a new movement called the Cockroach Janta Party. What began as an online joke in response to reports that a senior judge had allegedly compared unemployed young people to cockroaches has turned into an upswelling of anger in India at something deeper. A generation of graduates who've done everything right but still can't find work that matches their aspirations. I'm Gemma Ware from The Conversation, a news and analysis platform partnering journalists with academics. Welcome to The Conversation Weekly, where experts explain how we ended up here. In this episode, how India's jobs crisis is fueling a new youth protest movement.
Rosa Abraham, you're the head of the Centre for Sustainable Employment at Azimpremji University in Bengaluru, southern India, where you produce the yearly State of Working India report. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Gemma. It's great to be here.
So, Rosa, the Cockroach Janta Party started out as a joke online, but it's now managed to bring thousands of young Indians out onto the streets in lots of different cities across the country, and there's now an ongoing sit-in in New Delhi. Why do you think it's hit such a nerve?
So the Cockroach Janta Party, it started off in reaction to a comment made by one of the highest persons in the judiciary.
The movement began after the country's Chief Justice compared unemployed youth with parasites and cockroaches.
The issue was that it seemed to identify the unemployed young as the problem without recognizing that they were the ones facing a problem. There are a huge number of graduates entering the workforce every year, but their ability to find jobs that suit their qualifications and the kind of things that they aspire for has really been stifled in the last few years.
In response, 30-year-old Abhijeet Dipke launched the Cockroach Janta Party online.
And so the burden shifted to the youth, and it described the youth as being wasteful and described them akin to parasites, which obviously was seen as an insult to a generation which has felt like institutions, the state, the private sector has failed them. And it became a place for youth who have been going through some dissatisfaction on various fronts to channel a lot of this discontent. And so the CJP, or the Cockroach Janta Party, provided the valve to diffuse a lot of these simmering tensions.
Now, Cockroach Janta Party is all set to hold its first physical protest in New Delhi.
We are here at the Cockroach Janta Party protest in Pune at Pune University, and hundreds of people have already gathered.
Those people coming out on the streets and this sit-in in New Delhi are calling for the resignation of the education minister, Dharmendra Pradhan, after a series of scandals in the education sector. Talk us through what's been happening.
So there are a couple of different exams that have been the flashpoints of this protest. In India, we have a lot of centralized exams to entry into various higher educational institutions. There was an incident where one of the exams was an exam for entry into medical colleges. The papers were supposedly leaked, which meant that some people had access to the papers.
The controversy began after allegations of a paper leak surfaced online. The document reportedly spread across multiple states before the examination.
Now, this was pointed out as a failure of the institution that was conducting these exams, again leading to a lot of youth discontent. There's also been other issues with school exams.
India's national school leaving exam is at the center of a controversy. Thousands of students alleging errors linked to a new digital marking system.
There was problems with the grading and so on. So this is the secondary school exam, the exam that students write at the end of their schooling, and the grades from this exam decide what colleges students have access to, which then has huge implications for their employment outcome. So currently the big demands that the CJP is making is vis-a-vis the exams and the failure of the education ministry in conducting these exams. It affects a large cohort. So India, we're sitting with a youth population of around 367 million. A large chunk of them are in education. And we've also reached a space where, a lot of people are going in for tertiary education. And it's cutting across caste, it's cutting across religion, it's cutting across gender. So rich households, poor households, all of these kids are equally affected when there's some kind of mess up in any of these exams. So it was only natural that when there is some suspicion of there not being fair play in either of these, it was bound to create a lot of unrest amongst students and families.
This kind of unrest among Gen Z populations, it's been happening in Indonesia and Nepal and Sri Lanka and Bangladesh. Is this India catching up, or is this something different, do you think?
We've seen what has happened in Nepal, and we've also seen what's happened in Sri Lanka. Political ramifications has been different. And I think in India, at this point, it's still too early to say what is the shape this is going to take politically. We just don't know. We've had these kinds of political movements about a decade back. So there was a huge anti-corruption movement, which had a huge role to play in toppling the last government. And then that's when the BJP came into power. So I'm not saying that these kinds of movements can be easily discounted, but I think it's too early in the days of CJP to actually make a statement around whether this is just a flash in the pan or is it going to just sustain and build into something larger. But I will say that the problems that they've zoomed into are problems that are large and booming problems. And I think these are the urgent crises that the Indian economy is facing right now.
Let's zoom into some of those problems. What is it like being a young person today in India trying to find work?
I'll just give you the numbers on this. So we have had a graduate unemployment rate of about 40%, which is to say that out of the young 20 to 29-year-olds who are willing and wanting to work and who are employed, about 40% are actually not able to find work.
Around 8 million young Indians enter the job market annually. India may be the world's fastest growing major economy, but it hasn't been able to take its youth along.
But I think it's also important, that problem is not something new. So even if you go back to 1983, that this unemployment rate is around the same. But the issue is that the scale has become huge.
Let's step back to try and understand how we've got to this point. Where does it start for you?
I think you can trace this back to just post-independence. The initial 5-year plans that India had laid out a strategy for massive industrialization. And because of the massive industrialization that was envisioned, there was a need for qualified engineers, qualified tertiary higher education institutions. So as a result, a lot of the plan focus was really on setting up good colleges. And so we had the Indian Institutes of Technology and so on coming up very early on. What happens is that this results in tertiary education being a sort of an enclave of some people who are able to access tertiary education, with many not having access to even primary and secondary education. So there is a certain prestige with tertiary education because it's highly sought after. And then overlay that with the caste system in India. The caste system is basically a system of social hierarchy, which kind of says that there are these certain groups of people and there's an ordering across these groups of people. And alongside this ordering, it's an ordering in terms of occupations. So manual occupations are lower down in the hierarchy, and your intellectual occupations, which means sitting at the desk or academics and so on, are higher up the hierarchy, which means that a lot of skills and a lot of occupations which are essential are also seen as less than and not given a lot of social prestige.
So in the 1990s, the education system in India was liberalised and a lot more privatisation came in.
Yes.
There's an astonishing figure in your recent report that since liberalisation, the number of higher education institutions has increased from 1,600 or so to nearly 70,000. What effect did this have on young people?
So one thing that India has seen in the last 40 years is that we've had massive expansion of graduate education. Eventually, when tertiary education opens up, there's a lot more private education institutions coming in. It made college access at least much more accessible than it was. But I will say that in the report, we also give data to show that there is still a lot of filtering in terms of who gets to access college, who gets to access what kinds of degrees. So your high occupation degrees like engineering, medicine, which gives you your good white collar jobs, so to speak, are still jobs that are accessible only to certain communities and the higher castes, the privileged castes. But the issue is that now that tertiary education and that degree has come, there's also this idea that you don't want to be doing certain kinds of occupations alongside now that you are a graduate. So, because of all of this, you have issues of skill mismatch, you have issues of people waiting for jobs that never come. And then finally, after a certain wait period, their aspirations mellow and they eventually just then enter the labor market. So, you have mechanical engineers who are then operating as construction workers, which is a huge mismatch.
And one of the routes, the options available to young people is through these government preparation or civil service type exams. How does that work?
So there's different kinds of civil service exams. There's one big Union Public Services Commission, which is for the union government jobs. And it's a centralized exam that students across the country sit for. But the state governments also have smaller exams that happen at various times in the year. Now, these exams have become a major point of entry into the labor market simply because they know that if they clear this exam and get that job, they're going to get a salaried job that pays well above the average salaried earnings and a salaried job which is highly secure. So the probability of being fired from a government job is very, very low. So every year, there's about 1,000 post openings that the Union Public Services Commission has, and there's a few million students who sit for that exam. So the ratio is for every one post, there's about 500 candidates writing the exam. And what happens is that we see youngsters preparing for exams over 4 to 5 to 6 years. They write it about 4 to 5 times. There's multiple entries. And like I said, the probability of actually clearing this is very low. So there's also a wasted potential you could think of because you spend a lot of time preparing for the exam, you spend a lot of money preparing for the exam. And I will say that it's also wasted because the exam preparation itself is not really a preparation that increases your productivity or increases your efficiency in another job. It is really just learning some specialized subject, some history and geography, or it could even be technical subjects, but it's not really something that makes you any more employable in a private sector job. So these exams have also been beset with a whole bunch of problems. One is that, again, paper leakages, the exams just not being conducted on time, which is that, there are vacancies, but the exams just don't happen. And even if the exams are happening, then the results, there is massive delay in actually releasing the results because there's a lot of cases, there's a lot of contestation around this. So because of that, that's also held up just hiring of new people onto government jobs as well.
Coming up, why are so many young Indians out of work and what can be done about it? That's after this short break.
What are you going to have? Can I have 2 pieces of mullet, please? A piece of sea perch and 8 whiting fillets, please, Pauline.
From a fish and chip shop in regional Queensland.
I believe we are in danger of being swamped by Asians.
To the heart of Australian politics. This is the unlikely story of the country's most controversial minor party.
Are you xenophobic? Please explain.
For 30 years, One Nation and Pauline Hanson have been ridiculed, dismissed and shut out.
Gone. I don't like it. No, I don't. Never did.
Now, no one's laughing.
One Nation continuing to surge in the polls.
Dramatic surge in support for One Nation. The fringe becomes the mainstream.
This is the story of how a party built on fear and grievance thrived, died, and rose again to upend Australian politics.
Well, I'm back.
Hanson 2.0 is the serious, strategic, experienced, battle-hardened political operator that we see in the news today.
I'm Ashlyn McGee. This is The Making of One Nation from The Conversation, and you can search for it wherever you listen to podcasts.
Welcome back. So, Rosa, who are the young Indians who are out of work and what are they actually doing?
In 1980s, if you look at this, the young unemployed Indian was largely coming from the richer households because they're the ones who can afford to wait. And so they're able to subsidize the waiting of one member of the household. But in 2023, you'll find more presence of young unemployed Indians from the poorer households as well. So in the sense, you could say that unemployment to some extent has become democratized because more and more households have now the ability to wait. So that's how there's been a changing profile of who these young unemployed Indians are. Another big composition of this is women. So women's employment rate in India is exceptionally low. Only about 40% of working age women are actually employed, and it's very low compared not just to our GDP per capita, but also compared to other countries as well. Most of them are graduates, and that's where you have this mismatch that on the one hand you've got this degree but you're not getting the job that you want. So in the initial years you'll find that the unemployment rate is very high. So over time they are eventually joining the labor market, but at the young age you're finding a lot of young women, a lot of graduates, and across all income classes characterizing the unemployed young Indian.
And they've got an option, haven't they? Either take any job that they can, go into the informal sector, or wait. Is that a real conundrum for young people?
They have an option to wait, but not beyond a certain point. There is a limit on how much you can wait. There is also another kind of search strategy that you decide, okay, I'm not going to wait for the job. So in many countries, you'll see the strategy where let's enter the labor market. It may be in an informal job. You may not be matching your degree qualifications and so on. But then you just get your foot in the door in the labor market, and then through experience, through networks, you are able to work your way up the job ladder, which is also a viable strategy for many youngsters across the world. But what we're seeing is in India, you don't have the job ladder as well. So even if you are to just get your foot in the door, you come in as maybe a gig worker. Do you then move from a gig worker to a supervisory position, to a managerial position? That doesn't seem to happen, right? There's also a social cost to this, right? It's very hard to find a partner when you are unemployed, when you don't have a job. I mean, especially for men. So all of these other kinds of social imperatives also come into play, and eventually they move into the labor market, often in informal work, and they stay stuck there. And that's where you're seeing this suspension of aspirations that kind of stay at that level. There's no eventual rejuvenation of that aspiration.
And does where someone live also play a role in the job they're willing to take?
I come from Kerala, and there's this running joke in Kerala that if you change the name of Kerala to Dubai, you'll find a lot more youngsters willing to work. And the background to this is that a lot of the youngsters from Kerala who are Malayalis, they typically leave the country and they go to other countries and do construction work, do other kinds of work, which they would not do in Kerala. So there's also this kind of stigma or the lack of dignity attached with certain kinds of jobs, which kind of disappear when you're not in the geographical of your hometown.
Stepping back a bit, how big a problem is all this for India? What consequences could this youth discontent, this mismatch between aspiration and reality of the job market have further down the road for India?
So the scale of the problem is huge because we've just got more graduates, we've got more youth as well. So in 2023, the young graduates, that was about 63 million people. And then if you're looking at how many of them are unemployed, that's about 11 million of these 63 million young graduates who are unemployed. But then because you're not seeing any sort of solutions in the horizon, you're not seeing really responses to this crisis, then that's why you're seeing this kind of simmering discontent, which is always in the background, which is now finding these release valves through movements like what we're seeing with CJP. CJP has gotten a lot of political attention, but I think there's also certain other events that has happened. So just 2 weeks back, there were massive protests in Noida, which is one of our major manufacturing hubs in the country.
Violent protests that broke out in Noida's Phase 2 industrial area. Huge protests that really brought Noida to a grinding halt.
The background of this was that workers were asking for minimum wage revisions. So salaries had not increased for almost more than 2 decades. And you had the Iran war, you had the gas supply shock. So prices have also gone up. So as a result, it was just a lot of pressure on this young and large workforce who have felt that, in a sense, that the social compact between state, between the private sector and themselves has not been fulfilled.
And what are the political consequences here? The government has reacted to the CJP by trying to shut down its founder, Abhijeet Dipke, calling the movement a threat and under foreign influence. He was just attacked, slapped at one of the more recent protests in Jaipur.
The whole protest turned up into a tense situation when few people attacked Abhijeet Dipke, the founder of Cockroach Janta Party.
How does the government's attempts to try and shut this down demonstrate about how worried they are?
Yeah, so I think the fact that, this has gotten a lot of attention, it is something that, unlike a lot of the other issues which have come up, it's not something that is appealing to certain groups. It kind of cuts across a lot of these traditional identities that politics has usually worked on. And that is perhaps something that can make the powers that be somewhat uncomfortable, but maybe not in a bad way. It might provoke them into action. We have yet to see what these solid actions are. In terms of the exams, for example, the exam has been rescheduled. There's also been increased security around scheduling the next set of exams as well.
India has blocked access to the Telegram message app ahead of a repeat national medical exam. The results of the original test were cancelled last month following allegations of leaked question papers.
These are just small fixes, right? And there's a larger institutional and a larger structural problem at play. If you ask me, is it that we've just created too many graduates? And that's not the problem. We have enough graduates. We've not overproduced graduates. There is a jobs crisis, which is that we just haven't been able to produce enough jobs for these huge number of graduates that are entering the workforce. We've not been able to smoothen the school to work transition and meet aspirations. But the hope is that this kind of glaze bare that there are institutional failures, there are also structural failures, and can we start thinking about remedying some of this?
You say this is a jobs crisis and it needs economic solutions. As an economist, what do you think could be done to improve the situation for young people?
I think in a very immediate sense, if it's a job crisis, where can we create jobs? So India is a country where, these public sector jobs are highly aspirational. You have a lot of people sitting for these exams. The irony is that there's huge vacancies for these jobs. So there are some estimates where if you just fill up vacancies in health and education, public sector jobs, you can create up to 2 million jobs. So I think, one, there is a role for the state that we have an understaffed local government. So the other feature of the Indian economy or the Indian bureaucracy is that somewhat top heavy. We have a lot of employees at the center and at the state level, but when you come to local administration, there's very few really government workers. The other thing is the private sector. What's been happening with the private sector in India is that there has been this resistance to invest over the last few years. And we have in India what is called a missing middle. So you have a lot of small one-person enterprises. Think of these as your petty small shops, your street vendors. And then you have really large enterprises, massive department store, for example. But your middle, so your small and medium enterprises who might hire, say, 5 or 6 people or maybe 15 to 20 people, that's missing. And that's where there's huge employment creation potential, but there's also potential to have high productivity levels as well. And I think that is also crucial when you're thinking around job creation.
Some great tips for economists in the government to listen to, Reza. Thank you so much. It's been fascinating speaking with you. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It was lovely talking to you, Gemma.
That's it for this week's episode of The Conversation Weekly. You can read more analysis of the Cockroach Janta Party on The Conversation, and we'll put some links to further reading in our episode notes. This episode was written and produced by me, Gemma Ware, and Mend Mariwani. Sound mixing is by Michelle Macklem, and our theme music is by Nita Sol. The Conversation is a non-profit news outlet dedicated to sharing the work of academic experts with a wider audience. If you like what we do, please consider supporting us at donate.theconversation.com. Thanks for listening.
Hello, curious kids. Have you ever wondered how high a volcano can throw lava in the air? Or
why is it that when you're in a bath your fingers go wrinkly?
Or even,
will scientists be able to make a new element?
Well, you're in the right place. I'm Eloise and welcome back to Season 2 of The Conversation's Curious Kids, the podcast where an expert answers some of your most head-scratching questions. Listen to The Conversation's Curious Kids wherever you get your podcasts.